People often say money can't buy happiness. But in this rusted-out, exhausted town of Youngstown, Ohio, I realized that $150 million could buy something far more disgusting: a fake family drama, where my 4 biological children were the lead actors. My name is George. I am 70 years old, a former steel mill worker living on a tight pension. If you are listening to this story and thinking that winning the Powerball jackpot is a miracle, then please stop for 1 second. Try to imagine this: the children of your own blood, the ones who cut you off for 7 long years, suddenly falling to their knees at your feet and crying just because you now own an enormous fortune. If it were you, would you open your arms and forgive them, or would you slam the door in their faces? Leave a comment and let me know what you would choose, and don't forget to follow along to see how this old man faced their greed. Now, let me tell you about that fateful night. Winter in Ohio this year was cold enough to cut into the bone. I had been sitting curled up in an old blanket, hesitating for a long time, before daring to turn the heater down to save every single dollar. Then the lottery ticket I bought late one afternoon at my usual convenience store changed everything. All 6 numbers matched perfectly. $150 million. Ohio law allows winners to claim prizes anonymously through a trust, and I had planned to stay silent so I could preserve what little peace I had in my final years. But life is never that smooth. Some greedy local bank employee must have sniffed out the news and leaked it to the press. In just one morning, my peeling wooden house was surrounded by dozens of reporters. And then, what had to happen finally happened. The very next evening, a shiny luxury SUV roared through the thick snow and parked arrogantly right in front of my yard. The doors opened, and my 4 children, Brad, Chloe, Travis, and Ashley, stepped out at the same time. They brought expensive suitcases, tear-soaked faces, and rushed forward to hug me as if all those years of cold distance had never existed. They cried and blamed themselves for abandoning their father. But in the middle of that chaotic, fake crowd, I saw Lily, my 17-year-old granddaughter, Brad's daughter. She stood tucked behind the car door, quiet, not making a scene, not acting. When my 4 children rushed into the living room to marvel at my luck, Lily finally stepped forward shyly. She said nothing about money. She only squeezed my calloused hand tightly, her eyes shining with genuine emotion. That warm squeeze from my little granddaughter was the only thing that kept me from throwing the rest of them out of my house right then and there. I opened the door and let them in, a decision I would later realize was the first mistake in a chain of tragedies. While the noisy laughter and chatter of my children echoed from the kitchen, where they were pretending to clean and cook for me, I quietly stepped onto the porch and lit a cigarette. Looking at the SUV's tire tracks carved deep into the white snow, my mind suddenly drifted back 30 years, to the days when this house had never known the smell of money, but had been filled with warmth. Back then, the Youngstown steel mill was still running, and Mary, my late wife, was still here. I remember those freezing winter afternoons as clearly as if they had happened yesterday. I would come home after a 12-hour shift, my whole body reeking of smoke, dust, and grease. Mary was always waiting for me at the door, holding a scarf she had knitted herself and a steaming bowl of potato soup. We were poor, desperately poor, but the house was never cold. The 4 children were still small then, crowded together beside the old heater, fighting to tell me about their day at school. I admit, I used to be an extremely strict father, sometimes to an extreme degree. Life as a worker in the Rust Belt was too harsh. Poverty surrounded us, and I was always afraid my children would grow lazy and fall apart. I forced them to work, to save every piece of bread, every loose coin. I never spoke gently to them. I thought that was how I had to raise them so they could survive. But perhaps it was my dry, rigid strictness that planted the first seeds of resentment in their hearts. Disaster struck when the steel mill shut down and Mary became seriously ill. My small pension could not hold anything together. I knelt before my wife and apologized for not being able to give her a more decent life. On the night Mary took her final breath, all 4 children stood around her sickbed. The look in their eyes when they looked at me was not sympathy. It was accusation. They blamed my poverty and helplessness for killing their mother. After the funeral, one by one, they packed their bags and left without looking back even once. For 7 long years, this house held only me, my old dog, and the broken memories of Mary. Beside the old frozen tire swing in the yard, the only toy I had made with my own hands for Lily when she was little, I realized a bitter truth. The poverty of 30 years ago, no matter how harsh it had never been able to tear this family apart. But today, when $150 million appeared, it brought my ungrateful children back. The only pity was that they had not returned to warm the heart of their old father. They had come back to tear apart the corpse of a family that had died long ago. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and the sizzling sound coming from the kitchen. How many years had it been since this house last heard the clinking of dishes in the morning? Stepping out of my bedroom, I thought I had wandered into a parallel universe. My 4 children, the same people who had been completely unreachable just last week, even after I called to tell them I had pneumonia, were now bustling around, cleaning up, and playing the role of the most devoted children in the world. Chloe, my second daughter, was busy scrubbing the moldy kitchen counter. When she saw me, she hurriedly wiped her hands on her apron and rushed over to support my arm, as if I were a crippled old man. "Dad, you're awake? Sit down right here. I made coffee for you. You look so thin. From now on, I'm going to cook for you every day," Chloe said, her voice so sweet it sent a chill down my spine. Meanwhile, Travis, my rough 3rd child, a mechanic with tattoos covering his arms, was bent over, fixing the squeaky door hinge I had asked him to fix 10 years ago. He gave a foolish grin. "That was my fault, Dad. I should have come back sooner to take care of this house." Brad, the eldest, was the same as ever, appearing in a spotless, sharp suit. He pulled out a chair for me, placed the morning newspaper on the table, and carried himself like a CEO. "Dad, I've already contacted several of the best private healthcare centers in Columbus. You can't keep living in this broken-down dump forever. Drafts like this aren't good for your joints. Next week, I'll bring you to my villa. We'll live together like we used to." Looking into Brad's sincere eyes, or at least the sincerity he was trying to perform, I felt a wave of bitterness rise inside me. They were acting too well. If there had not been a winning lottery ticket worth $150 million sitting in my lawyer's safe, perhaps I would have cried from emotion. I knew all of it was just a performance, but deep inside some weak, dark corner of old age, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to enjoy the lie. I craved the warmth of family so badly that I accepted drinking poison coated in sugar. However, in that ridiculous family circus, there was still one exception. It was Lily. She did not take part in the comedy act of adults competing for credit. That morning, while the grown-ups were busy mapping out their future plans for me, I saw Lily squatting on the back porch in the biting cold, gently brushing Max, my old, shedding, one-eyed dog. Max growled at everyone except Lily. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled up the collar of my coat. "Aren't you going inside to warm up?" I asked. Lily startled and turned around. Her eyes were red. She rubbed Max's head, hesitated for a moment, then spoke in a tiny voice. "Grandpa, I'm sorry." "What did you do wrong that you need to apologize for?" "I'm sorry for everything. For my dad, for my aunts and uncle. They shouldn't have treated you like that. I know why they're here right now." Lily looked up at me. A tear rolled down her cheek, red from the cold. "Please don't trust them, Grandpa. Please." My old heart felt as if someone had squeezed it tight. Lily's innocence was exactly like her grandmother's, like my Mary's. She was the only real thing in this house. I sat down on the old stool and gently patted Lily's shoulder. "I know, little girl. I'm old, but I'm not blind. Let them act. I want to see where this play is going." That was what I told myself. But I had no idea that the truth about to be exposed would be crueler than anything I could have imagined. Thanksgiving finally arrived. It had been a very long time since the wobbly oak dining table in my living room had been forced to carry such a massive and luxurious spread of food. There was a large golden roasted turkey, expensive salads ordered from the French restaurant downtown, and several bottles of red wine that Brad bragged were imported and worth thousands of dollars. Flickering candlelight fell across the bright, fake smiles on my children's faces. They were dressed in glamorous outfits, completely out of place against my peeling walls and yellowed ceiling. Once the wine had taken effect, I knew the moment for them to show their hand had arrived. Brad cleared his throat and gently tapped his fork against his wine glass, making a clear clinking sound. The entire table immediately fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, burning with a greed they could no longer hide. "Dad," Brad began in the warm, professional tone of a real estate broker. "Today, our family is reunited, and that is the greatest blessing. We know how hard you have worked your entire life. And now, when God has given you a deserved reward, we want to help you manage it, so our family can rise together." As he spoke, Brad pulled a thick stack of documents from his designer leather briefcase and placed it neatly in front of me. "This is the family asset restructuring plan that Ashley and I stayed up all night preparing." Ashley, my youngest daughter and now a lawyer, immediately continued in her sharp voice. "That's right, Dad. To avoid massive progressive taxes, we need to distribute the cash flow immediately." Then, one by one, they began handing down a sentence for my money. Brad proposed taking $30 million to expand his real estate investment fund, which was on the verge of bankruptcy. Chloe dabbed at dry, non-existent tears and asked for $20 million to secure the children's educational future, even though I knew perfectly well she was drowning in huge credit card debt from her extravagant lifestyle. Travis slammed his hand on the table and demanded $25 million to open a chain of auto garages all along the East Coast. And Ashley, my sharp lawyer daughter, calmly requested $25 million to open her own law firm. Altogether, it came to $100 million. They calculated it quickly, like guillotines, and acted extremely generous by leaving this old man $50 million for retirement. I looked around the dinner table. I looked at the faces that had once belonged to little children, children who used to cling to me and beg for candy, now transformed into vultures staring greedily at a piece of meat. The turkey in my mouth suddenly turned dry and bitter. I slowly put down my fork and pushed Brad's stack of documents aside. The living room sank into complete silence, with only the crackling of the heater remaining. "You've all calculated this very carefully," I said slowly, my voice low and rough, but every word clear. "But you're mistaken about one thing. This money does not belong to us. And it certainly does not belong to you." Brad frowned. "What do you mean, Dad? If it's your money, then of course." "I have already made my own decision," I cut him off, straightening my back. My sharp gaze swept across each of my children. I have lived in this Rust Belt region my entire life. I have watched this town slowly die. Thousands of children here are living in poverty, just like you once did, with no money for tuition and no health insurance. So I will use 99% of this lottery money, roughly $148.5 million, to establish the Mary Scholarship and Medical Support Foundation. I paused and looked directly into Brad's eyes. "Named after your mother. This money will revive this damned town instead of flowing into the pockets of people who only know how to throw money at vanity." 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds passed. The air in the living room thickened, so suffocating it felt as if it could be cut with a knife. The compassionate, devoted expressions on my 4 children's faces froze, twisted, and crumbled piece by piece. The masks had officially fallen. "Dad, you're joking, right?" Chloe was the first to break the silence. Her voice trembled violently, not from sadness, but from rage. "You're going to throw $150 million at complete strangers and let your own flesh and blood drown in debt. Debt you brought upon yourselves, not me," I replied coldly. "You stubborn old bastard." Travis suddenly shot to his feet, knocking his chair over with a loud crash. His face was bright red, blue veins bulging on his forehead. He pointed straight at my face. "You're insane. Your whole life, all you ever knew how to be was a dirt-poor factory worker. Now that you have money, you want to play saint. Did you forget that you once forced us eat moldy bread just to survive?" Travis's words were the spark thrown into a barrel of gunpowder. Ashley, from the position of a daughter, instantly transformed into a cold-blooded attorney. Her eyes narrowed with threat. "Listen carefully, Dad. If you try to establish that ridiculous foundation, I will file a petition with the court to have your mental state evaluated. I will prove that you no longer have the legal capacity to manage that money." I gave a cold smile. "Go ahead and try, daughter. I am still perfectly clear-headed." At that moment, Brad, the seemingly calm mastermind, finally began to growl. He tore off his dignified disguise planted both hands on the table, and leaned his face close to mine. His eyes looked like those of a wild animal robbed of its prey. "You think you're so noble, George. You think using this money for charity can wash away your sins. Mom died because of your poverty. Because you didn't have money to buy her medicine. We had to crawl out of this filthy mud on our own. And you never cared. And you never cared. That money is ours. You owe us." Brad's words stabbed straight into the most vulnerable part of me, like a knife. They were using Mary's death to tear me apart. They truly had no humanity left. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, but I clenched my teeth and stood up. I would not allow myself to collapse in front of these wolves. "Get out of my house, right now." I pointed toward the front door, my voice hard. "All of you, get the hell out, and take this pile of expensive garbage you call leftovers with you." There were no more attempts to persuade me, no more fake tears. They cursed, kicked things around, and rushed into the rooms to collect their designer suitcases. 15 minutes later, heavy footsteps thudded through the house. They dragged their suitcases to the door, throwing the most poisonous curses behind them. "You'll regret this, old man. You'll die alone," Travis roared before stepping out into the snow. Amid all that chaos and rage, I saw Lily. Brad grabbed her arm tightly and dragged her toward the SUV, its engine rumbling loudly in the yard. Lily struggled and turned back to look at me. Through the broken wooden doorway, I clearly saw tears streaming down her terrified face. Her lips moved without sound, but I could read them. I'm sorry, Grandpa." The car door slammed shut. The SUV revved its engine, growled into the dark night, and tore through the white snow in my yard, leaving me alone in the shabby house, surrounded by the smell of expensive turkey and shattered wine glasses spilling across the floor. I bent down and held Max's old head as he pressed himself against my leg. They thought this old man would suffer and surrender. But they were wrong. Looking at the wreckage left behind by my own biological children, and remembering the pain in Lily's eyes before she was taken away, the weakness inside me completely evaporated. In its place, a flame of fury and determination had been lit. The play was over. Silence covered the house after that horrifying Thanksgiving night. It was not the peaceful quiet of old age, but the suffocating stillness before a major storm. I knew they would not give up easily, but I could not have imagined the depth of cruelty that the children I had raised with my own hands were capable of reaching. Only 3 days after they left, the dirty war officially began. It started with a legal strike aimed directly at my throat. One morning, the mailman knocked on my door and handed me a thick, gray envelope from the Mahoning County Court. Holding the documents in my hands, I felt dizzy as I read the cold legal language printed on the pages. The plaintiffs were Brad, Chloe, Travis, and Ashley. And the person who had drafted that vicious petition was none other than Ashley, my youngest daughter, the one I had once worked night shifts to put through law school. Ashley had used the cruelest loophole she could think of, Mary's rusted tin box. When Mary was still alive, she had an old cookie tin hidden under the bed, where she kept loose change saved from grocery shopping, just in case someone in the family got sick. Ever since she passed away, I had kept that tin exactly as it was, as a keepsake, occasionally dropping in a few spare coins. Ashley argued in the lawsuit that the $2 Powerball ticket had been purchased with money taken from the undistributed shared property box of their late mother. Under the beautiful-sounding label of protecting their mother's estate, they asked the court to freeze the entire lottery prize and demanded 50% of the total winnings. That very afternoon, the bank manager called me with an awkward voice to inform me that my trust account had been temporarily frozen pending the court's ruling. But the legal blow was only the surface of the iceberg. They knew this lawsuit was weak and difficult to win, so they switched to a more savage strategy: psychological terror. They wanted to drain the strength of a 70-year-old man. The next night, while I was sleeping, a sharp crash tore through the darkness. A brick half wrapped in newspaper had been thrown straight through the living room window, shattering the glass. The winter wind howled into the house, carrying icy snowflakes with it. Max, my old dog, barked nonstop in panic. When I trembled, turned on the light, and stepped out, the first thing I saw was a line of bright red spray-painted words smeared across the wooden front door. Selfish oldie man. The days that followed were hell on earth. Local thugs, men I knew for certain had been hired by Travis, my rough third son, kept hanging around the house. They threw garbage into my yard, cut the landline, and revved motorcycles loudly back and forth every night, so I could not sleep. Even worse, they used dirty media tactics. Chloe and Brad began going on social media, making up tearful stories about how I had been an abusive father, a man who had beaten their mother, and was now stealing the family fortune. The small town of Youngstown began looking at me differently. Familiar neighbors quickly turned away when they saw me at the supermarket. I was completely isolated in my own hometown, becoming an old wounded animal cornered by wolves as they waited for the moment I collapsed. During those dark days, the only person who did not turn his back on me was Pop, an old friend who had worked the furnace with me for 30 years. Every day, Pop drove his old truck to my house, bringing me a few containers of soup and helping me nail wooden boards over the broken window. "To hell with those brats, George," Pop said, taking a drag from his cigar and patting my shoulder. "We used to chew through coal slag. A few cheap tricks like this can't kill you." But they did not spare Pop either. Once they realized Pop was my only emotional support, Travis started aiming at him. The thugs went all the way to the diner, where Pop often sat, threatened him, and splashed paint across his truck. I told Pop many times to stay away from me so he could stay safe, but my stubborn old friend refused, where he began eating away at me. I could endure being tortured by my children, but I could not forgive myself if my best friend was dragged into it. One Friday night, a snowstorm swept across Ohio. The snow fell so heavily it swallowed even the streetlights. I was sitting curled up beside the heater, gripping a baseball bat in my hand in case the thugs came back, when a frantic knocking sounded at the door. It was not violent pounding, but a weak, broken tapping. I carefully peered through the crack in the door. Under the dim yellow light, a small figure stood hunched over, trembling in an oversized puffer jacket covered in white snow. It was Lily. I hurriedly threw the door open and pulled her inside. Lily's face was pale, her lips purple from the cold, and her frozen hands were swollen. She had hidden from her family, taken an intercity bus, and then walked nearly 2 miles through the snowstorm to get here. Panicked, I wrapped a wool blanket around her and quickly made her a cup of hot tea. "Lily, are you crazy? In a storm this bad, you could have died out there." I scolded her, but my voice cracked with heartbreak. Lily held the teacup in both trembling hands, tears falling into the thin steam rising from the drink. "Grandpa, I had to come. I couldn't call because as I knew your phone line had been cut. You have to be careful. My dad and Aunt Ashley, they're planning something horrible." Through tears, she told me about a phone call she had accidentally overheard in Brad's office. It turned out that the lawsuit over the tin box was only a smokescreen. Both Brad and Ashley knew perfectly well that the court would dismiss the claim because there was no solid evidence. Their real purpose in freezing the account was to cut off my resources, making sure I could not hire a good lawyer or security guards to protect myself. My dad told Aunt Ashley that you have a history of high blood pressure. Lily sobbed, her eyes filled with horror as she remembered her father's words. He said to let Uncle Travis keep sending the thugs to harass you. The more stressed and frightened you became, the faster you would break down. Dad said, "Just push the old man until he has a heart attack. Either he signs the papers and splits the money to get peace, or he dies. And then the money naturally comes to us. They don't need to win the lawsuit, Grandpa. They're trying to kill you with fear." Hearing those words come from the mouth of my 17-year-old granddaughter sent a cold current down my spine. Colder than the snowstorm outside. The person trying to push me to death was none other than Brad, the eldest son I had once carried on my shoulders to watch baseball when he was little. Their cruelty had gone far beyond ingratitude. It had reached the very bottom of evil. I held Lily tightly in my arms and let both of our tears fall. Lily's arrival that night was like a sudden flash of light, tearing through the darkness of despair. My heart, which had been bleeding from pain, suddenly hardened into steel. I gently patted her trembling back and whispered in a cold, sharp voice I barely recognized as my own. "Don't be afraid, Lily. I will not die. And I promise you, they will not get a single dollar." The next morning, after I had taken Lily to the bus station, so she could safely return before Brad found out, the wail of an ambulance siren tore through the town's quiet air. A terrible feeling shot straight into my mind. The local sheriff rolled down the window of his patrol car and shouted toward me, "George, get to the general hospital right now. Old Pop had a heart attack in the diner parking lot." The whole world seemed to collapse beneath my feet. I borrowed a neighbor's car and drove like a madman to the hospital. The smell of disinfectant hit my nose so hard it made me nauseous. Through the glass of the intensive care unit, Pop lay there, lost among tangled wires and the dry beeping of the heart monitor. The doctor said Pop had gotten into a violent confrontation with several tattooed young men right at the diner. Extreme anger and stress had triggered a heart attack. My old friend had nearly lost his life simply because he had protected me. But what made my blood boil was not only the sight of Pop. It was the scene taking place right there in the hospital waiting area. On the far row of seats sat Brad, Chloe, Travis, and Ashley. They were neatly dressed, holding expensive cups of coffee, whispering among themselves. They had not come to visit Pop. They had come to hunt. They knew Pop's collapse was the final blow to my spirit. When they saw me step out of the ICU, staggering, my eyes bloodshot, and my hair disheveled. Brad stood and walked toward me with that familiar fake expression. "Dad, we heard Uncle Pop was hospitalized, so we hurried over," Brad said, his voice pretending to be sympathetic, though his eyes were as sharp as razors. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a pre-printed asset distribution agreement. "You see, Dad? Your stubbornness is hurting the people around you. You're exhausted, and Pop almost died. And this. All you have to do is sign here, and every problem will stop. The lawsuit will be dropped, and those thugs, I promise they'll never appear again." I looked at the clean white paper. I looked at the words. Equal division of 100 million USD. Then I looked across the faces of my 4 children. Triumph was obvious at the corner of Travis's mouth, and cold cruelty sat in Ashley's eyes. If I had been the version of myself from a week earlier, perhaps I would have collapsed. Perhaps I would have signed that paper to buy a cowardly kind of peace. But Lily's warning from the snowstorm still echoed in my ears. They thought this old man had been broken. Fine. I would show them exactly what they wanted to see. I let my shoulders drop and acted like a father completely drained. I raised my hands to cover my face and forced out choked, trembling sobs. You win," I said, my voice broken with pain. "I can't take this anymore. I don't want anyone else to die because of this cursed money." Brad's eyes lit up. He hurriedly pushed a fountain pen into my hand. "Great, Dad. Sign right here at the bottom." "No!" I slapped his hand away and looked up with tear-filled eyes that hid a deeper intention. "I will divide the money among you. But not here, secretly, like thieves. You humiliated me in front of the whole town and smeared my name in the press. I want to end this properly. Next Wednesday, at Youngstown City Hall. Call every television station and invite every reporter. I will sign the transfer papers and announce the truth in front of the public, so this family's name can be cleared." The 4 children looked at one another, briefly surprised, but soon their faces turned smug. In their arrogant, short-sighted minds, a 70-year-old man wanting to hold a press conference was nothing more than a desperate attempt to cling to one last bit of empty dignity before surrendering. "Fine, Dad. We'll do it your way," Ashley nodded, putting the paper back into her briefcase. "Next Wednesday, City Hall. We'll handle the media. Make sure you arrive on time." They turned and walked away without even glancing once toward Pop's hospital room. The sound of their leather shoes struck proudly against the hospital floor. I stood there, watching the backs of 4 vultures hurrying away to prepare for their feast. I wiped the fake tears from my cheeks and straightened my back. The grief had completely disappeared, replaced by a frightening, cold stillness. They thought City Hall would be the place of their coronation, but they did not know that this old steelworker had prepared a massive media grave for them. The historic reversal in Youngstown had been set. "Your play is about to end, my children." The 3 days before the press conference were days I lived like a ghost. I deliberately locked every door of the house, kept the lights off at night, and let the false rumors on social media, rumors woven by my children, continue spreading. I wanted them to believe that I had completely broken down, that I had surrendered and was only waiting for the day I would sign the death sentence of my own dignity. But behind that closed door, I was not crying. I was busy racing against time. Thanks to Lily's warning that the frozen account was only a smokescreen, I found a powerful ally. His name was Marcus Vance, a veteran attorney and the head of a large, non-profit legal foundation in Cleveland. Marcus had grown up as a child in this Rust Belt region, so he understood the price of poverty and the cruelty of greed. When I gave Marcus the evidence of the attack on my house, the photos of Pop's truck splashed with paint, and especially the recording of Lily's account, which I had secretly recorded as evidence to protect her, Marcus was so angry he trembled. He immediately launched a special legal process and quietly prepared the paperwork to establish the Mary Charity Foundation without touching the frozen account. The county court also quickly lifted the temporary freeze after Marcus presented evidence proving that the money used to buy the lottery ticket had come entirely from my personal pension account, not from any undistributed inheritance belonging to Mary. But we kept that information completely secret from Brad's side. Meanwhile, my flock of children was celebrating early. Through a few old acquaintances, I learned that Brad had put down a bold deposit on a new Porsche using borrowed money from loan sharks. Chloe was bragging to her friends about the upper-class life she would soon have in Chicago. Travis was getting drunk every night at bars, boasting about his grand chain of garages. They were drunk on an imaginary victory, completely unaware that the trap they had set for me was slowly turning around on them. On the night before the press conference, I went to the hospital to visit Pop. My old friend had survived the crisis, but he was still very weak. Looking at the bruises on Pop's aged arms from the fight with those thugs, my heart tightened. Pop looked at me and spoke hoarsely through his oxygen mask. "George, tomorrow, don't surrender, buddy." I held Pop's rough hand tightly, leaned close to his ear, and whispered, "You just rest, Pop. Tomorrow, I'll collect both the principal and the interest for you. Watch TV at 10 in the morning." When I stepped out of the hospital, the Ohio night wind blew through my gray hair. I pulled up the collar of my old denim jacket. Everything was ready. On Wednesday morning, Youngstown City Hall was busier than ever. Dozens of vehicles from major television networks like CNN, Fox News, and local news agencies packed the entrance. Brad and Ashley had done an excellent job sensationalizing the story in the media to pressure me. They wanted all of America to witness the scene of a jackpot-winning old man bowing before family values. I stepped into the grand hall of City Hall. Camera flashes from reporters flickered nonstop, making my eyes hurt. My 4 children were already waiting on the stage of honor. They were dressed beautifully and elegantly, like A-list stars. Brad wore a custom designer suit and smiled with smug satisfaction. Ashley stood beside him with a stack of legal documents in her hands, carrying the air of a victorious attorney. Chloe and Travis stood behind them, unable to hide the naked greed in their eyes. In one corner of the hall, I saw Lily. She wore a simple shirt, her face worn out from worry. When our eyes met, I gave her a slight nod to reassure her. Brad stepped up to the microphone and announced proudly before hundreds of cameras, "Ladies and gentlemen, members of the audience and the media. Today, our family is here with my father, George, to announce an important decision that will bring an end to the unfortunate misunderstandings of recent days. My father has agreed to sign the asset distribution agreement in order to restore harmony and preserve the core values of our family. A round of artificial applause rang out. Then it was my turn to step up to the podium. I looked small and weathered in my old denim jacket, standing in the luxurious space of City Hall. I stood before the microphone and looked straight into the television cameras broadcasting live to millions of viewers across America. Thank you, everyone, for being here, I said, my voice low and rough, but echoing through the hall. Brad is right. I am here today to end everything, but not with their agreement. I turned to look at Ashley. My eyes shifted from fake exhaustion to the cold sharpness of a steelworker. My youngest daughter, a talented lawyer, sued me over the savings tin of her late mother. My eldest son, Brad, threatened to have me locked in a psychiatric facility. And my third son, Travis, hired thugs to throw rocks through my house, terrorize me mentally, and even beat my closest friend until he suffered a heart attack and had to be hospitalized. The entire hall erupted into commotion. Whispers and murmurs rose like a tide. The smile disappeared from Brad's lips. Ashley's face turned deathly pale. They thought a 70-year-old man would be frightened enough to hand over his money, I declared, my voice as hard as iron, cutting through all the noise. They wanted to push me to death, so they could seize this lottery fortune. But today, before the American people and the media, I want to reveal the true nature of the family harmony they just spoke about. I pulled a stack of documents from the pocket of my jacket. Documents bearing the red seal of the state of Ohio. The same documents Attorney Marcus Vance had completed yesterday afternoon. I have signed and finalized an irreversible legal process, I announced, raising the documents in front of the cameras. The full 99% of my lottery winnings, equal to $488.85 million, has been permanently transferred to the Mary Charity Foundation to support scholarships and medical care for the children of poor workers in this Rust Belt region. This money will be managed by an independent board, and not one of my children will have the right to touch even a single cent. Youngstown City Hall completely exploded. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing nonstop. My 4 children stood frozen like stone statues. Shock, humiliation, and extreme rage were written clearly across their twisted faces. Travis went mad and roared, trying to rush up to the podium and shove me aside. "You damned old bastard, you tricked us." But immediately, the security team that Marcus had prepared in advance rushed out, locked Travis's arms behind his back, and pinned him to the floor in front of millions of viewers across the country. Ashley's legs gave out, and the documents in her hands scattered everywhere. She understood that having her dirty legal tricks and her role in psychological terror exposed live like this would completely destroy her moral standing as an attorney. Brad stood frozen, staring at me with hatred in his eyes, but powerless. His reputation as a real estate broker had officially been buried. In the middle of the chaos, shouting and wild camera flashes, I looked toward the corner of the hall. Lily was standing there. She was not screaming like her parents. Through the tears rolling down her cheeks, Lily was smiling, a smile of relief, pride, and deep peace. I stepped down from the podium and walked straight toward the back door of City Hall. leaving behind the mess and the helpless curses of my ungrateful children. Attorney Marcus was already waiting there to take me away. The next morning, bright sunlight poured over the rusted steel mills of Youngstown, wrapping the town in a warm golden coat. In the parking area in front of my old wooden house, the ordinary RV I had bought, with the remaining 1% of the money, was running smoothly. Max, my old dog, was sitting obediently in the passenger seat, wagging his tail. Pop had gotten better and called to wish me a safe journey. Before shifting into gear and rolling out, I picked up my phone and sent one final message to Lily. It was a photo of the sealed document for an irrevocable education trust worth $1.5 million, taken from my own remaining share, stamped in her name, along with the words, "Your college fund. Live an honest life and keep your pure soul, my Lily." I powered off the phone and tossed it into the glove compartment. Pressing the gas pedal, the RV slowly rolled forward, heading straight toward the western highway filled with sunlight and freedom. The curse of the winning lottery ticket had been broken. Greed had received its rightful punishment. And now, the new life of this old steelworker had officially begun.